And now, it's the Finding Your Spine podcast with host Chase Spears.
Welcome back to the Finding Your Spine podcast, where we call you to live and lead boldly in the truth. I've got in studio with me today Pedro Orta, a man who I should say you need no introduction, but I'm going to do one. But I mean, you have really lived and walked the talk in another major bureaucracy, and stood firm. Like a lot of my work was entirely in the Army. And it's often hard to find people outside the military who understand what it's like standing up in a bureaucracy. But you're one of those guys because you did it in the Central Intelligence Agency. And quite the story to tell. I'm really excited about having you here and looking forward to digging into it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chase Spears. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And yes, it's finding your spine in these large bureaucracies. And it's a long story, penned it into a book, but more than a pleasure to tell it here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it, and let me just go ahead and kind of tell everyone about you a little bit. You know, like firsthand through your family, the stories of what it's like escaping tyranny. Your family came here from Cuba. You were born in Miami to a close-knit conservative family, and spent 14 years working in business before you ended up doing 18 and a half years there in the CIA. Much of that time spent in war-torn regions like Iraq, Afghanistan. I don't know if there are any other places you'd care to talk about, but you spent a lot of time in broken parts of the world.
2 years in Iraq, 2004, 2006. Then I did a tour in a war zone, a semi-war zone. I named it Carmenia in the book. That was 2 years, 2007, 2009, with a lot of field deployments. Followed it with a year in Afghanistan. I was in Kandahar during the intense time of the they were trying to once again take over the Kandahar region from the Taliban, 2010, 2011. Then I ended up going back to headquarters CIA, but going back to the field, spending a total of 7 months in a Middle Eastern country, doing more war zone work. And eventually that would lead to going back out to Afghanistan for 3 months. So by the time you add it up, I had almost 7 years of war zone work for the CIA.
Yes, quite a bit of time overseas in the sandbox. Pedro, found himself in the midst of a supervisor who was trying to wrangle him into being a part of a lie, and absolutely refused. And this led to severe reprisals and ultimate termination from the agency in 2018. And I'm just so proud of the stand that you took, and that's what we're going to be digging into. You have a bachelor's degree in political science, double majoring in international relations as well from Florida International University. Pedro went on to earn a master's in security policy studies from Georgetown University. And like me, you love school. You then went on and graduated from Christ for All Nations Evangelism Boot Camp in spring of 2021, and then went on and did some missions work in Tanzania after that year. Then went on to earn a diploma from Rhema Bible Training College's Itinerant Minister Program in May of 2023. He is a licensed minister with the Evangelical Church Alliance since 1991, and in 2024 published this book, The Broken Whistle, a deep state run amok memoir of a CIA whistleblower. I have read it cover to cover. Highly encourage everyone out there who's interested in the topic of courage to get a copy. I found it very, very intriguing, especially because of our shared experience working in an institution, and there were so many parallels that I found. It seems like no matter what agency you're in, there's still an agency vibe, an agency culture when it comes to circling the wagons and protecting itself. Pedro also went on and produced 2 films, one of them, Deep State Gangsters, the other one, The Broken Whistle. You've been featured widely across a lot of media platforms. You've even got to talk to Tucker Carlson. I'm jealous. That's pretty cool. And you currently call Tulsa, Oklahoma home, but it's a long way from Langley.
Definitely is.
God's country.
21 hours, I think, to make it from that Northern Virginia area to Tulsa, but it's been a good place to live, away from the mayhem of the D.C. area.
Oh, man. Isn't it good to be away from that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a rat race in D.C. Not only that, but the cost of living.
Oh, yeah.
People don't realize just how expensive it is. I mean, I had a toll road that if I had to take the toll road each way in the morning and in the afternoons, $15 down the drain just for the toll road.
Yeah, the cost of living is so high there. So I've been stationed up in that area twice in my career. First was 2007 to 2010. I was at Fort Meade, just kind of up between DC and Baltimore. And then my last tour there was 2017 to 2018. The Army had me there on a Georgetown University fellowship, and the school experience was amazing. I'm a nerd. Some people buy boats. I get books. So I enjoyed the school environment, and that was a lot of fun. But no joke, when I was driving west on 495 and I crossed the Wilson Bridge and I saw the DC Capital Region in my rear view mirror, I was like, go west, young man. Just keep driving west. Just keep driving west. And by the time I got to Missouri, I started feeling really good. I was like, just keep driving west. So, I share the happiness of being outside the Beltway. I like going back and visiting. I get back to DC about once a year, and I have probably I know more people in DC than I think of anywhere else in the world. But it's good living out in God's country.
People don't realize the sacrifices that you have to make to work in that DC area. It's not just the cost of living as well, but the commutes to work. I mean, I had colleagues that would commute an hour and a half each way to work. In the morning to work and in the evening on the way home. I mean, I had some colleagues that would get up and be on the road 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Just try to beat the traffic in, and you really can't beat the traffic. There's traffic at any time of the day. But it's just a deep sacrifice, and there are a lot of good civil servants out there. But at the end of the day, these are just massive bureaucracies designed to self-preserve. And if you don't play the bureaucratic game, they will find a way to crush you and force you out.
They're very, very good at that. And yeah, my commute was an hour and a half each way because otherwise there was no way I could afford to find a place that my family could fit into. And, funny enough, just recently I was curious. I started looking at what's cost of living like up there these days now. Just we made a recent trip for a conference. I just got curious. I wonder what it's like to live up here now. And it's tripled since I lived there in 2018. I can't imagine, how do people do it? At least the cost of housing has gone threefold.
The problem that has happened in Northern Virginia, when I first moved up there in 2000, I lived in Fairfax County. 2 years later, I found myself in Loudoun County in Ashburn. It was still somewhat farmland, still being developed, but in came high-tech data centers. Northern Virginia is now the capital of data centers in the U.S. and for the most part, even in some ways, the world. Some insane amount of internet traffic for the world actually goes through Loudoun County. So that high-tech sector brought in a lot of money as far as wages, people being paid top dollars for their positions. Compound that with just government workers, and you have a very well-educated workforce that makes a good amount of money. So what happens is all the other services to go along, schools, private schools, tolls, county, this fee, that fee, whatever it may be, they just extract that money. It's like every year they know the government workers are going to get a 2, 3, 4% raise. So they go ahead and increase the tolls every year. When I first started taking that toll road in 2002, it was $1.25 during peak hours, and actually $1.50 peak hours, $1.25 non-peak. When I moved out, it was almost $8 during peak hours, and non-peak it was like $7.60.
Gosh, yeah, I don't want to think about what it costs to go across the Bay Bridge now. That was one that we drove across quite a bit when I lived up there. But yeah, we have a toll highway in Kansas, and I'm just irate that we have any toll roads in Kansas, but it is mild compared to the tolls that I would pay up there. But anyways, enough about DC life, because we are, this topic is about you and your story, and tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up in a family that had firsthand experience with communism. I mean, we talk about this a lot, and I've read about it, but I mean, your relatives lived this, so I know you've got some knowledge that is way beyond me.
I've got some firsthand knowledge as far as what I witnessed from my grandparents, my parents, my uncles, aunts. In the case of my father's side, He was anti-Castro, involved in anti-Castro activities in the early 60s. He was put in jail, and through a connection, he was able to get out of jail. So he had to flee Cuba, or else he would be imprisoned. Back then, the U.S. opened their doors wide open to the Cubans. So my grandfather was able to come to the United States, and then eventually his family, which would be his wife, 3 sons, 1 daughter, would follow along. In this journey, I found out that I had granduncles in Cuba, his brothers, who, because of the anti-Castro activities, were put in jail. One of them actually spent 20 years in jail. Now, this caused significant family separation. We're talking about relatives who were split apart and did not see each other, in some cases, for decades. I remember growing up, my grandmother, his wife, the father's side, crying. I mean, just hysterically crying. And I'm asking her, Grandma, what's going on with you? And she's telling, well, my mother died, and I can't go to her funeral. Mind you, she hadn't seen her mother in more than a decade. So, I mean, separation of family. Not only that, but businesses left behind, property forfeited, confiscated, farms, animals taken. In one case, from my aunt, she married into a family that had wealth in Cuba. Well, they had land, they had animals. They decided to slaughter their animals and leave Cuba, like try to leave the government with nothing, because they basically forfeited, lost everything. Mm-hmm. So we saw that. And yeah, it leaves a very strong impression on you as far as, the freedoms that we have here could very easily be lost. And, we could easily just go down that same path where the government dictates everything in our lives, and eventually, our property, our ability to make wealth, our ability to have freedom of expression, have a business can be stripped away from us. And that left a lasting impact on me. And not only did it leave a lasting impact on me, but, the nature of the city of Miami. Miami would harbor many other nationalities. Fast forward to the 80s with the Contras, the Sandinistas, in Nicaragua, the civil wars down there between Honduras, El Salvador, and so forth. We had a lot of Nicaraguans that moved to South Florida and began to also, show us the problems that they had in their own country. And consequently, it just reinforced the need for, maintaining our freedoms in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that so many young people in America, well, and I shouldn't just say young people, because it's of all generations. We have this issue of people who want more from the government, and who look at socialism with this romantic notion, and every single time it ends in tyranny. Every single time. And I mean, I think that's something I so appreciate about the Cuban community is, like, they haven't forgotten this. Like, they know what they walked away from. And I mean, just look at the way South Florida has even started voting now. I mean, it's very, very different. I think they recognize the stakes, right? And so, man, just what I can only imagine what it had to be like sitting as a young child and just hearing those stories and talking to people who lived that. And it's just, I'm glad they shared that, because it's so easy to forget. I mean, that's something that we've got to work to pass on, because it's just, it's like in Scripture, what you're only one generation away from everyone forgetting the truth and forgetting the goodness of God and forgetting the goodness of liberties. And it's just amazing how human nature always airs back towards being enslaved in one way or another.
And also growing up, having parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts who basically left everything behind in Cuba, have to start from zero. It created an environment of a lot of hard work, entrepreneurial spirit, the willingness to basically pick up the hand and just get to work whatever you can find to do and be the best you can at it with integrity in order to make a difference and better the lives of not just your own, but your family and your community.
Yeah, and that speaks a lot to, like, character. To give up your land and all your possessions and to cross the span of water with nothing but the clothes on your back. I mean, that's very, that's a very pioneering thing to do. Even in this place and time, I can't imagine making that call, being forced to make that call to say, okay, well, do I stay here and hold on to all the comforts that I have worked so hard to have, but live under tyranny, or do I walk away from every bit of it and start all over again? And that's just, and I think that goes into how you were raised, and a lot of the things that undergird your character. Let's talk about that. What was it like being raised in a family who came out of that shadow?
Well, it taught me the values of integrity, honor, respect, being good to your neighbor, putting your hand to work and doing the very best you can do, being willing to take risks, not being one to be a freeloader just to take whatever is given to you, but, find a way to make things happen, find a way to do your best, bottom line. Ended up, rather than going to school immediately after high school, working in that Miami business environment. So now I was exposed to the Cuban who came over and who had that work ethic, who built businesses, working predominantly in the grocery industry. So I got to see firsthand how they worked. I mean, it was amazing that I could do business, shake of a hand, turn my back, and they would keep their word, I would keep my word, and there was no need to sign a contract. So it definitely had a lasting impression on me that, unfortunately, when I go into the government arena, I find out that everything I learned about work is like, just throw it away. None of this applies. This is totally different. I mean, it's a sad story, but it's the truth. I mean, whereas I grew up working in an environment where I can trust people. If they told me they were going to do something, they would do it. Now I end up going into the government arena, and, here I go with this book, having a story in which I'm being told repeatedly, go here, go there, talk to this person, talk to that person, go apply for jobs. And ultimately, I couldn't count on anybody to keep their word.
And it's such a weird paradox, because when you're in the government sector, I was in the military, you were non-military, but a lot of the work the CIA does is very not unlike the military in some ways. I mean, because you had to be armed. You went to war zones. You had to go through weapons qualifications. There are a lot of similarities. And when we come in, we come to these institutions where there's so much talk about trust and shared sacrifice and having the backs of the person to your right and to your left. And I think there are instances where that's true. And I had unit experiences where that was true. And then there are places where it's not true. And where it's not true, it's never just partially not true. It's all the way not true. It's like that little spot of spoil on an apple. It just spreads so quickly. There's never like really just you can trust 98% of the people in the unit. It's like, no, you can trust them all, or you can trust hardly any of them, and you've experienced that. So let's dig into, how did you get into the CIA? This is definitely something that probably wasn't something that you would have thought of as a young lad coming up and working your way up in business.
I mean, growing up in this environment with all what's going on in the world, not just Latin America, Nicaragua, we also had Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, back in the 80s. I grew up in this, Cold War era, Cold War II with Ronald Reagan. So I always had an interest for history, for foreign relations, military affairs, intelligence. And that's how I ended up eventually going back to school and studying political science and international relations. And because of those interests and that degree, eventually what would happen here is CIA recruiters came to the university, and it's like, oh, great, I have an opportunity to potentially work for the Central Intelligence Agency. So I was able to meet with the recruiters, and they were very impressed with my ability to go to school at night and get good grades, all A's, a few A minuses, and work full-time. And they immediately said, yeah, sure, we'll offer you a graduate fellowship. And my thought was I would rather go in with a graduate fellowship so that I can continue studying And that's what I did. I eventually would basically start as a graduate fellow, where it was actually, I was basically like a full-time employee. At first I started full-time, and then eventually I reduced it to 32 hours a week, but I would still work and go to school late afternoons, evening, to be able to get my graduate degree and then turn that into permanent CIA employment.
So what's it like working? Well, let me back up. What was your job? What was your role?
At the CIA, I met with the Department of Intelligence, the Director of Intelligence, as it was known, is now the Director of Analysis. So I started as an analyst, as a political analyst. And after a few months, I transferred over to the Crime and Narcotics Center, and I was doing more counter-drug political type analysis. So it was deep research, trying to find every kind of intelligence you can find, whether it's human, geointelligence, signals intelligence, open source intelligence, also networking with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the INR, Intelligence Research Department in the Department of State, or other Department of State entities, or even diplomats, and bringing all those sources of information and trying to make sense out of it to be able to produce finished intelligence products. And they could be either a short report, a senior executive brief, or a president's daily brief, or for that matter, an oral briefing. So it was just a lot of reading, a lot of dissecting information, collecting information literally for weeks, for months, and trying to make sense out of it to be able to produce, an alert. Look out, there's something going on in this country. There are problems with some drug trafficking trends here. This is something you need to look at to be able to, make some policy decisions to combat the drug trafficking.
So, yeah, we've had a lot of intel analysts who worked in the brigade that I was assigned to, and we actually had a little bit of overlap in our time in Afghanistan, as I found out. Different areas, but similar periods. And I never envied their role. It just, because what I saw as a public affairs officer who worked across the hall from our intelligence directorate was, God bless those guys and gals. The commander looked at them and expected them kind of to have a magic ball, to be able to say, this is what will happen, this is what is happening. And it was never that clear.
That's why it's called intelligence. You do the best you can. Sometimes you have very clear intelligence, and you're very sure of what's going on. It's indisputable. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're taking a best guess. And you have to be very straightforward and let your consumer of intelligence know what you know and what you don't know. And as long as you do that, you keep that level of integrity as far as the information you're presenting, you should be okay.
Have you ever watched the movie Midway, the new one that came out about 5-ish years ago? I want to ask it for a fact check here. There's the scene. I love the entire movie. I probably watch it 2 or 3 times a year, and the soundtrack, I literally have the soundtrack as part of my driving listening playlist. I think it's marvelous. But there's this one scene, the admiral wants to go down and actually see the intelligence operation. And as it's explained to him, the man says, "Look, sir, what we can give you are clues. We can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but," and he gives the wedding analogy. All right, say you think there's going to be a wedding, and you think there's a wedding because, well, you've heard that the best event venue in town has been rented for a particular point in time, and you've noticed that the flower shops are getting busier closer to that point of time, and you hear the band has a commitment around that point of time. And this is what you have: snapshots, clues. Is that accurate? Was that a good representation of what intel is like?
That is a really good representation, because a lot of times you have just indicators that indicate potentially something's happening or something's about to happen. You don't have, per se, the smoking gun, but you have what appears to be a gun that's loaded, and it's being cocked and it's being ready to be fired. So you presume that you're going to have a fired gun pretty soon, and you can warn with intelligence of such an act.
I know there was a book that was written off of. Now I need to go find that one and add that to my list. My problem is I pick up about 6 books for every one I actually read. I have a problem.
We become book collectors
Yeah.
more so than readers.
Yeah.
And it's like the list of books we want to read are just so many that we just never can get to all of them.
Yeah, and I think every interview I get at least one or two recommendations, and then there are people emailing me recommendations, and that's on top of the ones that I find of my own. So, it is what it is. I acknowledge that there are worse addictions to have, So you've started your career there in the CIA as an analyst. Did you have an area that you specialized in career long, or what was your niche?
Starting as an analyst and transitioning over to the Counter-Narcotics Center, my area of expertise was Central America and the Caribbean. So I was basically the go-to analyst for the CIA on anything related to drug trafficking for Central America and the Caribbean. I did that for 3.5 years. Getting my certification as a career analyst, they put you through the Sherman Kent School of Analysis. Back then it was almost like 7, 8, 9 months, I believe. I don't remember the time frame. And you have to graduate to get the certificate. You get certified as an analyst. So I did that. Eventually what would happen is, you're right, I mean, after almost 4 years of being an analyst, just sitting in front of a computer, just constantly trying to read everything I can read, having been in a business environment where I did outdoor sales and I had a lot of people contact, I wanted to do something different. So Iraq, 2003, 2004, I volunteered to go to Iraq. So that caused a serious and significant change in my career, where I literally was extracted from analysis, volunteering to go to Iraq. What turned out to be a 3-month volunteer TDY, temporary duty assignment, turned out to be 4 months temporary duty, with a permanent change of station that led to 2 years in Iraq. Now, I ended up being put in charge of a department that had a lot of liaison duties of being the interface between the CIA station, Baghdad station, and the military in MND Baghdad, basically the military command in Baghdad, and for that matter, other military commands that were embedded or working around the Baghdad regions. So I ended up doing a lot of liaison type duties, going out, meeting with the G2, the G3s, at the MND level, and even for that matter with the MNC and the MNFI, the Corps and the Force. And it was just a lot of exchanging information, making sure that the military got what they needed from us, that we received from the military what we needed for us, making sure we had lines of communication in case there were emergencies, which we encountered numerous emergencies. I had one time an officer run up to me, "Hey, I've got people that are under fire right now. They have, insurgents trying to get to them, and they're hunkered down in a room. And I have to find out, well, where are they? And I have to call the MND Baghdad and get them to respond to rescue them." So things like that.
In the height of a war zone, so quite a different pace.
Absolutely. Working 7 days a week. Back then, we were basically working a good 80 hours a week, sometimes 90, occasionally 100, but typically 80 to 90. And on that note, because I was basically the go-to person for contact with the military, anytime there was a threat report from the CIA needed to get out to the military, I would get called at night. So I was basically on call 24/7. Eventually, they realized that I couldn't keep up the pace, so they had some help. TDYers come in to help me, so we were able to split up some of the night duty. But we were on call 24/7.
So take us to where does the origin of this start? Because we were at dinner last night and we were talking about how one doesn't grow up thinking they're going to be labeled whistleblower. We all start in a career, and we have our goals, and people like us try to develop expertise and become experts in our fields. And for some of us, there's a drastic change in the plot, and you had a drastic change in the plot, which led to the work that you're doing now and led to the publication of this book. And where does that come in the timeline? Let's break into that.
Eventually, my career at the CIA, I would get my operational certification to be a case officer. I would do basically a paramilitary operations officer type job in a country called Carmenia. Things happened there. Quite a contrast between the management team in Baghdad and the management team in Carmenia, where I named the station Potemkin Station, night and day. A station of excellence in Baghdad, a station of clowns in Carmenia, Potemkin Station. That would lead to a situation where a third-year extension in that country was rescinded. I would have to leave a year early, and I would end up in Afghanistan in 2010, 2011 as a counterintelligence officer, working with pretty much every single case officer, doing, counterintelligence to keep our officers safe. This was around the time of the coast bombing in 2009, where a suicide bomber killed 7 CIA officers. That's a long story, but pivotal time for me to be doing counterintelligence in Afghanistan. And one thing led to another. And what we run into here is, by the time I get to Afghanistan in 2014 as a deputy chief of base, I had years of experiences in the CIA as far as what to do, what not to do, behaviors that should be observed in a war zone, behaviors that should not be allowed to happen in a war zone. Not only the training that they gave us, policy-wise, leadership training, one-on-one discussions with leaders that you do before you go out as a manager in a war zone, or for that matter, any station or base for the CIA. I was well-trained, well-qualified, put in a position in a base in Afghanistan in 2014 as a deputy chief of base, where basically this book is born. What happened in that base was I was working for a chief of base who, nice lady, she had her qualifications, she had done well in other arenas, had never been into a war zone, didn't know what it was like to be rocketed and mortared, didn't know what it was like to be separated from family, didn't know what it was like to work every single day in austere environments with dirt, noise, or lack of quality food. She just came out of a European tour. That's pretty drastic. You're working in Europe for 3 years, and now you're in a war zone. So I can understand her dissatisfaction or her, uncomforts. But eventually it leads to harassment of a subordinate in this base. And I was asked, literally, to side with the chief of base in false accusations against a subordinate who was basically maligned, accused of drawing a weapon, accused of being this and that and whatever. And this officer had done no wrong. In reality, we had just serious mismanagement by the chief of base. Had turned the base into a social club on steroids to appease her appetite for social activity, for dining, for yoga classes. Basically, her idea of having this war zone tour was survive. And her survival was basically social activity. So we weren't meeting with the military as well. We were having officers going out into dangerous zones where rockets are impacting when we shouldn't be out there. And when the incident occurred where they wanted to hang this innocent man, by that time I had already blown the whistle accidentally. I had already discussed these issues with a regional psychological officer who had come out to the base. I had already discussed this with our superior in Kabul, so this did not come as a surprise to them. But ultimately what happens here is when the incident blows up with the false accusations and wanting to hang this innocent man, at that point in time, it escalates to the chief of station. The chief of station, the deputy chief of station, the most senior officer in country in Afghanistan were briefed by me on these issues. The end result was, okay, you go on home, do your rest and relaxation tour. We'll figure this out and we'll get back to you. I'm on home on my R&R. I get called into CIA headquarters, and I'm being told, you're not going back to Afghanistan. You get an extra week of R&R. You can apply for any job you want. We'll help you find a job. And that's when everything just basically became a total nightmare.
Now, the supervisor in the book, you label her as Cobb Kathy.
Chief of Base Kathy.
Chief of Base Kathy. And what year was this? Where you're in Afghanistan and this all begins?
2014. December 2014 is when I first get out there, and this happens basically through the end of February 2015.
Okay, and so it starts there, and December 2014, and it's roughly the end of September 2018 when the crescendo hit. So this began a very nearly 4-year assault of the institution against your character over something that was, I see, and you admit in the book, should have been a minor issue. You see a supervisor who is doing things the supervisor should not be doing, and what is our responsibility to do as human beings, much less federal servants? You report, and there are ways to do that, and that's what you used. But you find out, you get sent home to Virginia for an R&R leave period, and you find out we've decided not to send you back to Afghanistan. It's pretty clear at this point in time what's going on.
I mean, clearly they were trying. The best way I can say this is they knew they had a serious equal employment opportunity issue with the harassment of the older officer that was falsely accused, favored over a younger officer that Cobb Caffey basically called an adopted son. So they knew they had a serious EEO issue here. So they wanted to destroy the EEO claim. The only way they can destroy that EEO claim was to destroy my claims, to destroy me, my character. On top of that, because of the nature of the abuse of power, the waste of resources, mismanagement, and for that matter, significant and specific endangerment to public safety, they had a serious issue here to address. And the way they wanted to address it was, rather than fix the problem, what's going on with Cobb Caffey, they wanted to paint me as a poor manager, as a micromanager, as creating a hostile work environment, as being a critical person. Just everything you can name it, they threw at me to discredit me, to basically destroy my claims of what really had happened in that base. But I told them, there's evidence of what I'm saying. There's discussions I had with the regional psychological officer. There are transcripts of same-time messages. There are emails. And not only that, but you can also talk to certain individuals, some of the military officers they could have talked to. They could have talked to, obviously, this older officer, but they didn't want to dig into the truth. Not only did they not want to dig into the truth, when I told them I need to get a hold of the materials that support my claims, they would not allow me to get the materials that would support my claims.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
And that just basically just continued to snowball. And what I mean by snowball is, I'm told, well, you think you have an issue with EEO? Talk to EEO. I did talk to EEO. EEO didn't want to hear about it. Eventually, I have to reach out to the Director of National Intelligence, EEO, and tell him, hey, I'm being told I've got an EEO issue, but I'm trying to talk to EEO, but EEO doesn't want to talk to me. So they send me to the Director of Operations Grievance Officer. So I talked to the Director of Operations Grievance Officer. This officer has the ability to talk to the Director of Operations Human Resources and immediately find a solution to this. My solution was very easy. Just find me a follow-on job and make sure that all the lies written in my memorandum for the record on my performance is corrected. That's all I asked for. They wouldn't do that. But the grievance officer, he's like, ooh, he's hot potato. I want nothing to do with this. You need to talk to EEO. So now I'm bounced back to EEO, so I'm talking to a different EEO officer. I'm talking to this other EEO officer, and this guy's laughing at my face, smirking at me. You should have just talked to the lady about these issues. I did talk to her about these issues. And EEO didn't want to help. He didn't want to help me find the documents. They became obstructionists. They basically tell me you have to go through this elaborate process. And on top of that, they wanted to keep it a separate, within the CIA, when you have an EEO issue, they have this other category, which is an internal harassment inquiry. They try to push everything into this internal harassment inquiry because it keeps it out of the EEO channels, EEOC, So there's no record of it, and it's very subjective, and they get to do whatever they want with it. And 9 times out of 10, you probably say 999 times out of 1,000, they find nothing. They don't talk to the people they need to talk to, and you never find out what happened. And you, who alleged harassment, have no way of seeing any remedies. So I was fighting not only lack of grievance help, lack of EEO help, but I'm being told, well, apply for jobs. I'm starting to apply for jobs, and it's like my applications go into this black hole. The jobs I'm applying for continue to be re-advertised, and they can't find people to fill critical jobs. And here I've got all the qualifications, and they won't even tell me no. It's job after job after job, and so I'm fighting this bureaucracy that's hell-bent on destroying me. On top of that, EEO begins to obstruct the process. They're telling me, well, you need to continue this process. I'm going through this process, and they're not doing anything for me. And on top of that, eventually I need to find a lawyer. They're obstructing the process to find a lawyer. And they're basically trying to punt and trying to find a way to defeat me so that I would basically resign and quit.
Yeah, they didn't want to do the work.
Because what they try to do is they try to push and punt the case so that the claimant quits, resigns, and moves on. I mean, another aspect of this case is, well, I'm told, talk to the IG, the Inspector General. Well, the Inspector General didn't want anything to do with this case. The Inspector General ignored my pleas for help, refused to investigate. Multiple times I reached out to them. And, eventually, as far as finding a job, I ended up taking what's known as a joint duty assignment, where I would get loaned out and do a rotation to another government agency. And I found a safe place to work. I met with the Inspector General for the intelligence community, the inspections division, and they offered me a job as an inspector. When all the jobs at the CIA closed and there was nothing I can do, I ended up going that route. But even that process was a problem, because the Director of Operations HR wouldn't even process my joint duty application. And in the process of trying to follow up, it turned into emails going into a black hole. And eventually, when I get a response, I got this nasty response from a manager accusing me of being belligerent with my email. And it's like, I'm not being belligerent with my email. I'm just following up. You basically cut and pasted and crafted a new email to falsely accuse me. Just a lot of nonsense. And in this nonsense as well, I had to deal with the rebuttal to a memorandum for the record that was just atrocious and full of lies on the work I had done and my character. And, it's like I told the Director of Operations, Human Resources, what you really need to do here is you need to rescind this MFR and have the raider, Cobb Caffey, do a legitimate MFR that is truthful and not full of lies. Because if you don't, if you want me to rebut it, I'm going to have to basically answer her false accusations. So when I answer those false accusations, they just went ballistic. They went nuts, bananas. I mean, it's like, ooh, you can't put this in this here. This is so full of EEO issues. Oh, so you're admitting I have an EEO issue and you don't want me to put it in there? Well, I got news for you. I'm not taking it out. Well, we're going to close this thing. Well, I'm not taking it out. So I ended up rewriting it, but I still had all the issues in there. And eventually they ended up fixing the MFR, but it still had derogatory language that would come back to bite me a few years later.
And this gets into the whole topic of reprisals, because when you're a federal servant and you make a complaint through a what we call protected communication, which is any communication that you are allowed that you make through what they call the proper channel, whether that be through the Inspector General or whether it be through the equal opportunity, or even if it be prior to that, trying to work one-on-one with that individual, the supervisor, the leadership, through what are supposed to be open-door policies. The whistleblower protection laws are there to prevent that person from then reprising, taking retaliation upon you for reporting an issue. And you so thoroughly document in the book all these laws, and I'm familiar with a lot of these because they're similar processes in the military, and in some cases they work, in some cases they don't. I can tell you, for me, when I was a company commander, I felt very bound by anti-reprisal, because I had this one person in my company who made a regular habit of going to the Inspector General's office and sliding, we know who it is, sliding anonymous envelopes under the door. It was almost like a clockwork thing, and we knew who it was. It was someone that we had tried to help and wouldn't even try to help herself. And so anyways, it was an open secret. They knew who she was. We knew who she was. But I was very, very cognizant of there is no reprisal. Let the system do what the system's going to do, and I didn't mess with it. And guess what? The system did what it was supposed to do. They investigated, and they saw, this person is just making things up, and it went away. It's so easy. It's so easy to do the right thing.
Right, this was a blatant case of reprisal personnel action taken against me. Short of tour, sent home for cause, for having spoken up on behalf of the harassed subordinate, EEO case, having spoken up for the significant and specific endangerment to public safety, the gross abuses of power, and the waste of resources. It's a slam dunk case. I mean, clearly. Anybody who can get the facts, read through it, and see it will know it. But unfortunately, the CIA doesn't care. They like to basically destroy each and every single case of reprisal sometimes I think lawyers are probably the biggest culprit here, trying to defeat a potential claim. At no time did I want to file a formal EEO complaint, for that matter, to try to collect $300,000, because by law, if you have an EEO complaint that is substantiated, you're entitled to $300,000. So, I mean, that's a hit on an agency. And not only is it a hit on an agency, but it actually gets a black mark, like it goes on the permanent record with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So you have basically a historical record. CIA took a reprisal against an EEO complainant, and done, historical. But I mean, I made it easy to resolve. Just give me a follow-on job and fix the MFR. But they wouldn't want to do anything of that nature. And, I got basically chased out, where I have to take safe harbor in the Office of Inspector General for the Intelligence Community. When I accept that job, now all of a sudden, the CIA IG is interested in talking to me, and now their tone completely changed. Their demeanor was night and day. Now I'm sitting across the table with a gaggle of IG personnel, and they're all giggly, being nice. And eventually they asked me, so are you going to work for the ICIG? And it's like, I felt like asking him, how do you know that? So, I mean, that uncovered collusion right there. So who's talking to you? So clearly, there's a lot of collusion going on between CIA EEO, CIA IG, CIA Office of General Counsel, CIA Human Resources, and so forth. So at that point in time, I decided that this environment is so toxic. I was bullied and beaten so bad. I mean, we're talking about, that was March, April, May, June. 4 months, day in and day out, week in and week out, incessantly dealing with all this nonsense in one way or another. I was just physically beaten. I said, I am going to go on leave without pay. Leave me alone. I want nothing with you guys until, eventually I start working for the Office of Inspector General for the Intelligence Community. And it would take almost a month and a half to 2 months for the Memorandum of Understanding to be signed, which is amazing. You would think they would want to sign it right away and ship me off right away, but it took a while. And in that process, the CIA IG tried to close the case down. I told them, I'm going to be off the system. I'm not going to be in CIA. I'll be gone for a month or two. 2 weeks later, they sent an email to me that I found a month later, that if I wouldn't respond, they would close the case. I tell them, no, don't close the case. So eventually I start working for the ICIG in September of 2015. And that's when eventually I have contact with the CIA IG, and reportedly they were going to investigate.
Reportedly. Yeah, you said something a minute ago that the CIA has a culture where it just automatically wants to make all complaints go away, that no matter what. And I was actually at a presentation probably about 3 weeks ago with a couple of analysts, intel analysts, not with that agency, with another agency, but I know they're all in some ways interwebbed. And they talked about similar things in terms of the culture. And I have my theories as to why this is, but I want to get your take because you're an insider. You lived this for 18 and a half years. Why does the CIA have such a stalwart culture of not wanting to investigate allegations? Because I look at it as an outsider, and again, I've been in the military, so I understand how some of this works. But I look at it and think the amount of energy it would take to investigate a relatively minor personnel issue is a fraction of the energy expended over the next 4 years of trying to destroy an individual for merely bringing the concern.
Most of these cases could be resolved with a simple meeting between some superiors and the aggrieved officer. And you'll find that that never happens. Why is a good question. There's a couple dynamics at play here. The Director of Operations for the CIA is a very toxic workforce. You get into the psychology of intelligence collection, running human operations. You're talking about psychopathic behaviors, criminal-like behaviors, manipulation, lying, cheating, stealing. If you were, per se, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs official for, let's say, Russia, and I'm trying to recruit you, I'm going to, by tradecraft, try to find whatever weakness I can find to try to flip you to commit a crime against your country. And unfortunately, what happens here is case officers do this for so many years that it's almost like if their brain gets rewired. And they lose their moral compass, they lose their convictions, they lose their conscience, and they literally begin to pick up these psychopathic tendencies. And eventually they are practicing this kind of tradecraft against their colleagues, their co-workers, their subordinates. So sadly, we find that for the most part, people that will rise up higher in the ranks have these kind of toxic, narcissistic type behaviors. And it's a known fact that they are issues. The IG for the CIA at one point told me, we know the Director of Operations is messed up. Now, this is how bad this is. I found myself in a room, round table, 12 individuals, approximately 10, 12, with the number 3 official for the CIA. At that point, it was the Executive Director, Moreau Park. And she was asked by one of the officers, we know there are issues in Director of Operations with some really toxic managers, but why do you tolerate this? I could not believe the answer she gave. Well, because they're very good at what they do. In other words, they're very good at conducting clandestine human operations and leading clandestine human operations. So we continue to employ them. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, I honestly believe from my experience that the Office of General Counsel plays a significant role. The Office of General Counsel takes each case and takes the lawyer mentality. We want to defeat this case. Defeat this case, fine, done. No liability for this agency. It becomes a performance issue. They can write it up in their PAR. I defeated X number of cases. Now, sadly, that does happen. Another factor here is, looking at it, there is a lack of empathy from management at times. You want to become a defender of the bureaucracy and not a defender of individuals, which is pretty sad. Because, I mean, your most important resource is actually people.
Mm-hmm.
It takes people to run an organization. It's not money. Money is not your biggest resource. If you don't have people, you can have all the money you want. You'll never be able to run an organization. So, I mean, you do have good managers in the CIA, and, you know, some of them make it further up the ranks. And the way you make it in the CIA is, just like employees have a hall file that managers keep on them, which is not good, you know, managers have hall files too. You know who are the good managers and who are the bad managers. And if you're able to find a good manager to work for, my goodness, you go out of your way to find that manager, to work for that manager. And you'll find that that's how most of the times people make it in the CIA. They find good managers to work for, and they ride that wave. It's kind of like riding a wave. You take it as far as you can.
So you're saying some of the cultural issues come straight out of the actual tradecraft of what we expect clandestine operatives to do. And God knows that's not a lifestyle I would want. We all watch the spy movies, and they're entertaining, and they're probably absolutely nothing like what the real thing is, as most of the time movies aren't. But I listened to an interview a couple of years ago. Albert Mueller did it, and I don't recall the name of the gentleman, but he was an intel expert, rose to a rather high level, and now he's a professor of practice. And they talked about this through a Christian ethics lens. Like, how do you do this job that requires you to deal in falsities and to live a double life? How do you do that as a Christian? And tight rope to walk there.
Well, I mean, if you live in a ghetto full of crime, you don't have to be a criminal to survive. There's plenty of cases out there of people who come out of ghettos and they were not criminals like the rest of the criminals in a ghetto.
Yeah, great point.
I spent 14 years in sales. I didn't have to be a lying, conniving SOB, cheating, stealing, and lying to close sales. I could be ethical and, produce results.
Yeah, there's always a choice to make. And speaking of choices, because I want to dig in this, because we've already burned through a lot of time. Several times in the book, you say there was a choice to make. Do I continue pushing for what's right, or which is the hard right, or do I just let this go and kind of collapse the sail and just move on, head down, get to my 20 years, and let these people just do what they're going to do. And every time you said, no, but it was the right thing to do, and I have to do what I know the right thing to do is.
In this process, I uncover that the whistle is broken, hence the title, The Broken Whistle. And the dilemma is, you're right. Okay, do I quit? Quitting could be seen two ways. I could quit, resign the CIA, move on, get out. Because I was undercover, very, very hard. Because of the nature of the work, very, very hard. It's very hard to translate a lot of these perishable skills in the private sector. So that was not an option. Then more importantly, had I resigned from the CIA, I would have basically absolved, relinquished any claims of reprisals whatsoever. At that point in time, they basically say, hey, you quit. We got nothing to investigate here. You resign on your own accord. No reprisals taken against you. That's actually illegal, but they do that. That gets into another point, and it's the entire process of how EEO and IG investigations are done for the CIA are completely corrupt. It's almost like a criminal conspiracy to deny you your rights. The IG system, broken. The CIA, even worse, with some serious issues they were having in there in the 2010s, with their own managers taking reprisals against their own IG employees. And for that matter, an investigation was conducted, and it was substantiated that the CIA IG leadership had taken reprisals against their own officers. So that's another separate issue. But what do? Okay. I believe I have a legitimate case based on the law. Does the law matter? If the law matters, I can't quit, because this is an issue about the law. And the law is very clear. You shall report wrongdoing to your superiors, and you shall not have reprisals taken against you. I was put in a situation where we were having serious issues of endangerment to our public safety and harassment of a subordinate. That's a line I could not cross. Our number one priority was to create a hostile-free work environment and keep our officers safe. That was basically main priority in a war zone. I mean, drilled into us left and right throughout the years working in war zones, and for that matter, in training and one-on-one meetings. So the law was on my side, but it's not that I'm taking a personal side or making this personal. It's a matter of, if the law matters, there's no way I can quit. So in this battle, there were different junctures in which, decision points. What do I do? And the only choice I had was to continue pushing, elevating, because what happened here is eventually I had to escalate. And in this escalation process, I'm bringing now revelations, disclosures, authorized disclosures through authorized channels to authorized officials. I'm talking about the Director of National Intelligence, Daniel Coates, the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon. For that matter, the Central Intelligence Agency, the leadership there, the Director, Mike Pompeo, his number 3, Brian Bulatao, the Director of Security as well. I'm making allegations with substantial proofs of serious deficiencies in these whistleblower matters. Add to that as an IG inspector working for the ICIG, I worked on an evaluation that evaluated the implementation of Presidential Policy Directive 19, the protections for whistleblowers. And we find that, we got pretty ink on paper, but it's not being enforced. So, I had no way of backing down or quitting. It was basically continue to push forward.
And every step of the way, when I was reading through the book, as you pushed, they did not make it easy. They made it very personal the entire way, up until the moment they finally fired you. And I found great irony how you mentioned they thought they were really sticking it to you by firing you, but what they did was they liberated you.
Exactly.
And I've had that same conversation several times with colleagues of mine in the military who have stood up on issues and have eventually kind of been pushed out. And I've said how ironic it is that people who are doing these bad things, they forget the most basic tenets of Machiavellianism, that if you really want the person who is making the noise to stop making the noise, what's the easiest way? Bring them into the circle, make them feel more comfortable, make them feel like you are addressing their concerns, do some little things along the way, drop some hints, and even if you're not going to actually fix the problem, but there is a very Machiavellian way to still bring them in and to get them to, in some ways, kind of seed a little bit. And it's a dark thing. I'm not endorsing it. But it's not a difficult thing. And I've had that conversation with several of my peers and said, how hard would it have been for them to make you just a little bit comfortable and make you feel like some of these things were going to be taken care of, and that would have satisfied your moral desire. And then later on you would have been upset because you found out they didn't actually fix it. But instead they just throw you out. And what do they do when they throw you out? They free you.
Let's look at the Office of Inspector General for the Intelligence Community, the ICIG, and my time there. We were working on an evaluation on the implementation of PPD 19. Why we were doing that? Because Congress was very interested. The leadership of the DNI, the leadership of the intelligence community, there was significant pressure from outside sources, outside groups, advocacy groups. Do we have intelligence protections or not? Can whistleblowers come forward, report waste, fraud, abuse, significant and specific endangerment of public safety, and not suffer reprisals? And if they suffer reprisals, can they use the system to, evaluate the claims? And we find that the system is completely broken. The ICIG got mad at me because my lawyer filed a lawsuit. They sent me back to the CIA. I had done absolutely nothing while I was at the ICIG. Everything I had done was basically pretty much in the hands of the CIA IG. They were still reportedly investigating, which apparently they weren't. That's another story. So I had basically had done nothing but just diligently work for the ICIG. When they sent me back to the CIA, they unleashed basically a Pandora's box of just hell on earth for them and for me. Because now I'm back in the belly of the beast. What I call round 2 and round 3 with the devils at the CIA headquarters, where at one point I call it the pit of hell. Hell is empty and all the devils are here, as Shakespeare said. It's literally my experience. So now I'm having to deal with just a repeat of what I went through in early 2015. 4 months of hell. Another, in this case, it's 8 months of hell, literally almost. So they unleashed just a significant incident that just continued to snowball. And you're right, all these leaders do nothing except allow the CIA Office of Security to engage in mafia-like tactics. Send a messenger. Hey, be happy you have a job or we can take it away from you. You know, I'm trying to meet with the director of security after he sent the messenger. And instead of arranging a meeting, what does he send? He sends the hitman, who I call Salvatore, on a Christmas massacre to basically kick me out of the CIA and put me through the personnel evaluation board. And as I stated in my book, okay, you have just freed me now to escalate. And, you know, that's exactly what I have done. It eventually led to a book, to the movie Deep State Gangsters, to another book, another movie, The Broken Whistle, and many interviews. Tucker Carlson, Clayton Morris, and a bunch of others. So now there's a huge public trail of serious deficiencies and abuses of power by the CIA to crush whistleblowers that is undeniable, that is getting attention. And undoubtedly, at some point in time, this will break forth and lead to something.
I tell you, the thing that shocked me the most was the issue with being able to get an attorney, because the CIA works in classified information, and so much of the work that you did was classified, and you went by another name, you had another identity in the work that you did. And because of that, for you to even get legal representation, you have to get approval from the CIA to get an attorney that they have to clear to be allowed to even represent yourself. I was just, my brain is still scrambled by this. I mean, I understand the classification implications. I get that part of it. But from a foundational perspective of basic constitutional rights, that you're now the agency that is acting against you, you have to get their approval to get an attorney that they will approve of in order to represent yourself against them.
For me, it was a challenge because I was an undercover officer. On paper, I did not work for the CIA, despite the fact that I worked for the CIA. So I could not go to an attorney and say, I need help with the CIA for XYZ reasons, because I would have to break my cover. That would be grounds for dismissal and revocation of security clearance. So I had to put in a request for an attorney to be approved with a limited security approval. Had I not been undercover, I could have gone to an attorney, but I could still be put through some administrative processes because you have to submit an outside activities report. They have to be cognizant of it and have to approve it, which you're right, that's a serious issue. On that note, in this particular case, when things really escalated after I got sent back to the CIA from the ICIG, and now the ICIG, the IGs were investigating me, accusing me of lacking independence when I worked for the ICIG. That's a long story, but the short of it is they were the ones that had a serious independence issue because some of the leaders inside the ICIG were trying to cook up a false narrative and a false plot that whistleblower protections were working. But in this particular case, I need a new attorney, and I submit the request on outside activities reports. And they immediately shut it down. Nope, you don't need an attorney. Go talk to the IG. Well, I've been trying to talk to the IG. The IG basically told me to go pound sand. The IG told me basically go F yourself is basically what they told me bureaucratically. And, it's like, well, the attorney reaches out to him, and they start hanging it up on him. No, you don't have any approvals. Click. So, so this leads to escalation, where now the Office of Security gets involved and starts literally investigating me for being an insider threat, a threat to the workforce. All because the CIA Office of General Counsel and the CIA IG are refusing to allow me to retain a new attorney because they didn't like the attorney I wanted. Because the attorney that I wanted was a powerful attorney who has connections at Capitol Hill and who could have really began to move the ball on my case. So they're obstructing this process, and it leads to basically now the CIA Office of Security investigating me, bullying me, threatening me. And, my request for the attorney basically just it went back and forth like a ping pong ball. And the irony of this is they finally approved this attorney after I was fired. And when the attorney reaches out to him, well, he's been fired. We have nothing to discuss.
Just amazing to me, the snowball. Thinking back from 2014 to 2018, such a simple matter, and just they add to it. Man, it's like watching an avalanche happening in real time. Reading the book, we're getting really close on time here. It's your story is so deep. It's a challenge. I do want to sneak in a couple of quick questions. We got about 3 or 4 minutes here before we need to wrap up, but I've never had anyone in this chair who's been there before, so I've got to ask, what's it like living undercover?
It becomes a serious challenge because you got to maintain your cover. If you don't maintain your cover, particularly if you're overseas or if you travel overseas, you could endanger not just potential assets that you're meeting or your clandestine operations or your clandestine operational hub. I mean, you could also endanger your own officers. A blown cover can lead to assets being killed, entire stations being shut down, entire intelligence collection operations completely shut down. So maintaining that cover is critical. So what happens is you become very protective as far as who you associate with. Literally. This is why, for the most part, CIA becomes a very insular type organization where officers will marry within the agency, or their circle of social activity is basically within the agency. So it leads to basically almost not having much of a social life outside of the CIA. So I mean, it makes it really hard to live.
Yeah, that's not something I would even want to try. I appreciate your stand, and I mean we need a whole nother episode to unpack. Get the book, watch the movie. It's really impressive watching all the things they threw at you, and I love all the Churchill references. I'm a total Anglophile, and so I really appreciate that. And there was a lot of passages I was actually wanting to read aloud here on the program, but it's just it so well captures the bureaucracy and the way that institutions just circle the wagons to protect at all costs and end up in the process expending far more energy than if they just solved the problem, and how much more trust would they gain if they just solved it. And I don't know why they don't do it. I mean, at least I've got a little bit more of a window into the life of a CIA operative and how that affects one's thinking and personality development. But boy, I was glad to never be an intel officer in the Army, I'll tell you that. It just looked like a hard life.
I mean, it's great work when they let you do the job.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll find most people will enjoy working in intelligence when you're able to do your job. But once you have those toxic managers, it can just basically destroy morale. I get into it in Potemkin Station. When I first went into that station, people were working on Saturdays. A year and a half later, Saturdays was a ghost town. Nobody was working there.
Let me ask you this real quick. I know the book isn't the end. I know the movies aren't the end. I know the interviews aren't the end. You're still working on trying to get some higher level attention on this.
Yeah, I'm working to see if I can get, Washington engaged, oversight, Congress, advocacy groups, lawyers, the Trump administration. I've gone out of my way to put this book into the hands of some of the administration members, the movie as well. And, I'm praying, believing that, through favor and grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, that, we're able to make some progress. And the end goal here is, and there's a need for justice for me and my family, absolutely. But more importantly is these deficiencies need to be corrected, because the issue at hand is, if whistleblowers cannot come forward and report significant and specific issues that endangers national security, what would be the consequences? 9/11 is one example. I get into one case here, John Reedy, where apparently there was a sensitive program that had serious problems and they did nothing about it, and it led to countless lives being lost. Or for that matter, look at the CIA and what happened in Coast. That's December 2009 in the base, where 7 CIA officers were killed because they had an unqualified manager leading that base. So employees in the intelligence community must have the ability to report what they reasonably believe evidences waste, fraud, abuse, significant and specific endangerment to public safety for the protection of U.S. national security. If not, some people herald Snowden as a hero, others as a villain. Now, some call him a whistleblower, some call him a leaker. By law, he's a leaker. But why did he do what he do? Because he knew the system would not work based on previous examples of NSA whistleblowers. Drake is one of them. Binney is another one. These are historical cases of NSA whistleblowers that reported through the system, and the system crushed them. So he said, I'm not going to go through that system, so he went public.
Yeah, and we've seen that so many times. And the system is only as good as the people behind it. And in my company, command level was a lower level, and we had good people around us, and the system worked because we let the right people do the right thing. But when the wrong people are at the helm, the ship gets steered the wrong way. Where can people follow you and continue learning about the journey and help spread the word?
Follow me at my website, pedroisraelorta.com, and most social media networks. X, for example, Pedro Israel Orta is my handle. Those are two good places to find me.
Good deal. Well, thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate you making the trek all the way up here from Oklahoma. Man, there's so much more I want to get into. It's a deep story and time got away, but man, I've enjoyed reading the book. I've enjoyed knowing you. I've enjoyed talking to you. I appreciate your service. I appreciate your stand. And man, we need more people like you who aren't just going to be pushovers.
Thank you, Dr. Chase Spears. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my joy. Coming to you from the Herzog Foundation Studios in Smithville, Missouri. To learn more about the Herzog Foundation and the amazing work they do to perpetuate Christian education nationwide, check out herzogfoundation.com. If you'd like to learn more about me and my other work, you can do that over at chasespears.com. It's a real pleasure to bring you stories like Pedro's here to show you that you can take a stand even against the biggest institutions. You just have to make the decision to do it. It's up to you to find your spine. Let's get to it. I'm Chase Spears. Thanks for listening.
Remember to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Finding Your Spine.